Hi, welcome back to Psychology 2. Now, in the previous two chapters, we outlined how social and developmental processes contribute to variations in our behavior across people. Now, this chapter extends that discussion by examining personality. Now, personality is a unique collection of attitudes, emotions, thoughts, habits, impulses, and behavior that define how a person typically behaves across a variety of situations. Now, Beth is willful, curious, and insecure about her appearance. Her husband, Barry, is compromising, resourceful, and sociable. Now, some of their children were more outgoing and independent, whereas others were more quiet and unassuming. Perhaps your family is similar in terms of its variety and variedness, seemingly like a cast of actors being put together like, from an off-Broadway play. How can we understand these similarities and these differences in personality? So that's going to be the focus of this chapter as we explore this critical question. How do we develop our personalities? How stable or changeable are they? Well, psychologists really don't agree on a single specific answer to this question. Personality is really difficult to define, it's difficult to measure, and it's influenced by many factors. Now we're going to look at such as 4 dominant scientific perspectives that have emerged to explain our personality, and we're going to look at them. The psychodynamic approach, the trait approach, learning theory perspective, and social cognitive approach, and we'll also touch on the humanistic. So I guess we're looking at a few more. There's no single approach that can explain all facets of personality in all people, and each perspective has advantages and disadvantages. As we describe each approach, consider your own ideas about personality. Do you think you inherit your personality, or is it formed through your life experiences? Examining such ideas speaks to whether you think personality is stable and consistent over time, or whether it can change. So let's get started by considering the theoretical perspectives. Now we're going to start with the psychodynamics perspective. Now we've revisited this several times. It's a Sigmund Freud-based perspective, and it's characterized where he feels personality is based on conflict. It's a dynamic struggle. Drives like sex, aggression, and the need for superiority conflict with the laws and social rules and the moral code most of us have. At some point in time, the laws are internalized, and the conflict is between these opposing inner forces. So Sigmund Freud developed a theory of psychosexual development. Now his original interests were based in neurology. He worked with people who, for example, had paralysis of their legs in an absence of any medical disorder or condition. The symptoms would often disappear once the person recalled and discussed stressful events and feelings of guilt or anxiety that seemed to be related to the symptoms. Now, Freud imagined that the human mind is like an iceberg. The region that pokes out through the top of the water into the light of awareness is what he would call our conscious. Now, the conscious consists of what we are aware of, our thoughts, sensations, feelings, and memories at any given moment where we are right now. That's your conscious. The preconscious, the preconscious mind contains elements of experience that are out of awareness, but can be brought back to conscious awareness simply by focusing on them. I may not know how many socks I have in my sock drawer, but if I stop to think about it, I can probably get a pretty good guess. It's similar to the concept of long-term memory. It holds all the memories, experiences, and perceptions that we're not consciously thinking about at the moment, but we can bring these to our conscious mind. And then thirdly is what he called the unconscious. And this is the most important level of consciousness. And it's the primary motivating force of our behavior. It holds memories that are too unpleasant or anxiety-provoking to be conscious. The unconscious contains all the instincts, wishes, and desires that have never been allowed into the conscious. This would be related, as mentioned earlier, to sex and aggression, for example. The unconscious can be revealed in dreams and what he termed Freudian slips of the tongue. To explore the unconscious mind, Freud engaged in a form of mental detective work called psychoanalysis. Essentially, talk about anything that pops up in their mind, or it's also known as free association. Now, the structure of personality from Freud's perspective is he developed what he called psychic structures, or mental structures that are clashing forces of personality. Freud proposed that there are 3 psychic structures. Now, you will have heard these before, likely. The first is the id, and it's present at birth. It represents the physiological drives and is unconscious. We're not aware of our id. It contains the instincts and it operates at the pleasure principle, which is the immediate gratification and avoidance of all discomfort. That's where the id is. The second grouping is what's known as the ego, and the ego stands for reason and good sense, for rational ways of coping with frustration. And as you might be able to imagine, the ego operates on the reality principle. The ego mediates between the id, and we'll soon hear, is the superego. The conflict between the demands of the id and the rules and restrictions of the superego lead to anxiety for the ego, which uses defense mechanisms to deal with the anxiety. And then the third is what we've just referenced, is the superego, and it develops throughout our childhood, usually incorporating the moral standards and values of our parents through identification, that is, becoming like these people. We identify with them, our parents, and therefore we become like them. The superego functions according to the moral principle. The superego holds out the ideal self and monitors the intentions of the ego. The superego floods the ego with feelings of guilt and shame if necessary. Now, this led to another development of Freud and what he called the stages of psychosexual development. Now, Freud's efforts regarding his psychosexual stages was very controversial when he introduced it, and it is still controversial today. Freud felt that there was an instinct, eros. Eros aimed at preserving and perpetuating life, and the eros was fueled by the libido, the psychic energy involving sexual impulses. Now, Freud introduced the psychosexual stages where he noted that a child could develop a fixation at a specific stage, one of his stages. And according to Freud, the fixation refers to arrested development that can happen at a psychosexual stage due to excessive gratification or excessive frustration that the child may experience at that stage of development. Now, he had 5 periods that he coined about this psychosexual development: the oral stage, anal stage, phallic stage, latency stage, and then genital stage. Briefly looking at each one, the oral stage is during the first year of life. If it fits into the child's mouth, then it goes in the child's mouth. 2 big areas in this oral stage are sucking and biting. Now, the conflict that emerges here is centered on the nature and the extent of the oral gratification. If there's insufficient or excessive gratification in any stage, this could lead to a fixation at that stage due to frustration. Now, adults with oral fixations could experience exaggerated desires for oral activity such as smoking, overeating, alcohol abuse, even nail biting. The second stage, or the anal stage, is during this second year of life, gratification is attained through either the contraction or the relaxation of muscles that control the elimination of waste products from the body. The general issue of self-control can bring a conflict between the child and the parent. Anal fixations may stem from conflict that leads from anal retentiveness or excessive self-control, or anal expulsive, which is a careless messiness and even sadism. The third stage, phallic stage, it's during the third year of life that the major erogenous zones in the penis for boys and in the clitoris for girls. Now, one of the terms that he coined during this stage is what's known as the Oedipus complex. This is where boys want to marry their mothers, and there seems to be hostility that's then given towards the fathers for that to occur. And the other term is the Electra complex. And girls want to marry their father, and there's hostility towards the mother to make that happen. Now, the resolution comes when children begin to identify with their same-sex parent, which happens at around 5 or 6 years of age, and this identification is known as gender typing. The fourth stage is latency stage, and this is where sexual feelings remain still beneath the surface, unconscious. Prefer playmates to be of the same sex and focuses on schoolwork and other such activities. And then the fifth stage is the genital stage, and it's the final stage. We either find sexual gratification through intercourse with members of the other gender. It's through this, though this starts with feelings towards parents again, the incest taboo causes them to repress these impulses and displace them onto other adults or adolescents of the other sex. Now, Freud believed that personality is almost completely formed by the age 5 or 6. The edible conflict is resolved and the superego is formed. Personality is influenced by traits that can develop because of fixation at any of the psychosexual stages, and 2, the relative strength of the id, the ego, and the superego. In a psychologically healthy person, there is a balance among these three components. If the id is too strong and the ego too weak, people will satisfy their desires with no feeling of guilt, no matter who they hurt or what the cost is. If the superego is too strong, it will create perpetual guilt, preventing the person from ever enjoying sexual pleasure. Now, like I said, Freud's theory was fairly controversial, but there have been other psychodynamic theorists, and we'll start looking at a student of his, Carl Jung. Carl Jung is a Swiss psychiatrist, and he developed his own psychoanalytic theory called analytical psychology. Now, Freud didn't support Freud's sexual instinct or that personality was mostly achieved by age 5 or 6. Jung instead saw that the importance of the middle age on personality development. Jung also described 3 components or parts of personality. The ego was the conscious component of personality, and it carries out our daily activities. The second grouping was the personal unconscious, and it contains all the experiences, thoughts, and perceptions accessible to the conscious, as well as the repressed memories, wishes, and impulses. It's like a combination of Freud's preconscious and unconscious. And then Jung's third grouping is that of collective unconscious. And it's the deepest and most inaccessible layer of the unconscious. And it contains the universal experiences of humankind, such as myths, dreams, symbols, religious beliefs, It also contains what he called archetypes, which are inherited tendencies to respond to universal human situations in particular ways. The collective unconscious contains archetypes. These are inherited tendencies to respond to the universal human situations in particular ways. Jung believed that our tendency to believe in God, the devil, or evil spirits, heroes, have to do with fear of the dark reflected in archetypes. Comparing and contrasting Alfred Adler's theory, he's another one who looked at Freud and his theory of personality with Freud. Well, both Freud and Adler believe that personality has different levels, namely the conscious level and an unconscious level. Both theorists believe that we must overcome struggles to attain certain goals, and that the issues in childhood could impede the development of personality. Adler, however, disagreed with much of Freud's theory. Contrary to Freud, Adler believed that behavior was motivated more by the conscious than the unconscious. Freud believed that the difference in personality results from a relative strength of the id, the ego, and the superego, where Adler, he emphasized the unity of personality rather than the separate components of id, ego, and superego. Now, Freud believed that personality traits develop as a result of problems during the psychosexual stages, where Adler, he believed that we were motivated more by the future goals that we may have than any early childhood experiences. Whereas Freud believed that sex and pleasure seeking are our main primary motives, Adler maintained that the predominant force of the personality is the drive to overcome and compensate for feelings of weakness and inferiority, and to strive for superiority and significance. To Adler, an inferiority complex describes very strong feelings of inferiority that may impede the development of our personality. Adler also described a style of life as a unique way people move from their childhood to adulthood, struggling to achieve superiority. Now, Adler also suggested that the creative self, a self-aware aspect of personality that strives to overcome obstacles and develop the individual's potential. Adler's view, that is, has been termed as individual psychology. Now, next we'll just touch on another psychoanalysis of Karen Horney. Now, she was from the era of around, let me think, 1885 to 1952. Now, Horney argued that little girls do not feel inferior to boys, and that the view that girls are inferior is founded on a Western cultural prejudice, not scientific evidence. Unconscious sexual and aggressive impulses are less important than social relationship in children's development. Genuineness and consistent love can alleviate the effects of even the most traumatic childhood, from Horney's perspective. Now, lastly, in this group, we're going to look at Erik Erikson. He too thought Freud put too much emphasis on sex. He felt that the social relationships are more crucial than the sexual urges. We are the conscious architects of our own personalities. Erikson proposed stages of psychosocial development. His first stage, of 8, is trust versus mistrust. Mistrust could interfere with the formation of relationships. His goal of adolescence is the attainment of an ego identity. So there was an element around conscious awareness of both the conflict that may occur at certain points in life and how we can gain strength of our personality from that. Now, if we are going to evaluate the psychoanalytic perspective, we could consider that the psychoanalytic theory focused attention on the far-reaching effects of childhood events. Now, it is important for parents to be aware of emotional needs of children. Not all of those childhood experiences root themselves in personality. Defense mechanisms was referenced, and defense mechanisms have become part of everyday speech. If you've used the term to repress thoughts or to overgeneralize or to catastrophize, you've used defense mechanisms. Another evaluative component is the psychic structures, maybe too vague to measure scientifically. How do you measure id, ego, and superego? The clinical methods used to gather evidence is also suspect. Most of the research was through case studies with non-representative samples of patients. So that really just means case studies is looking at 1-2 people at a time, so it's not a very big population sample. And when I reference the not representative sample, just means there's not much in the variation of the population that was investigated. So this ends our part 1. Next week we're going to look at part 2, and we're going to finish the remaining theories, and we will finish with the measurement of personality and testing. I hope that this is giving you some insights of personality, not so much about Freud's. It's controversial, it's suspect, but more in terms of there isn't an easy way to explain personality, and yet it's something we all have at varying degrees, and no personality is precisely the same as somebody else's. Very neat. All right, we'll see you in part 2. Bye now.